Eldermere City did not ignore people loudly. It did so quietly, through glances that passed over faces without pausing, through doors that opened just wide enough for some and never quite far enough for others. It was a city that had perfected the art of selective noticing, and Clara Hayes had long ago learned how to exist within its blind spots. She stood outside the window of Maison Varel and allowed herself precisely 30 seconds. She counted them. Not because the number mattered but because limits did. Limits made indulgences safe. Contained. Harmless. The gown before her was not extravagant in the way that demanded admiration. It did not glitter or shout. Instead, it held the light, softly, deliberately, as though it understood its own worth and felt no need to argue for it. Pale silver silk fell in quiet folds from a narrow bodice, the neckline edged with the faintest embroidery, so fine it could only be appreciated up close. It was the kind of beauty that assumed it would be noticed. Clara exhaled slowly. 28. 29. 30. She should leave. Instead she opened the door. A small bell chimed, not loudly but clearly enough to announce her presence. Warmth met her immediately, scented faintly with lavender and something subtler beneath it. Polished wood perhaps, or the quiet assurance of wealth. The room was not large but it did not need to be. Every surface was arranged with care. Nothing crowded anything else. Each gown, each bolt of fabric, occupied its space with the confidence of something that belonged exactly where it was. Two attendants stood behind a long counter. They looked up. There was a pause, barely a second, perhaps less, but Clara felt it all the same. That quick assessment. That silent calculation. She knew the result. She always did. "I am only looking," she said before either of them could speak. Her voice was steady. It always was. "Of course," one of them replied with a polite inclination of her head. The other returned her attention to a stack of folded silks. Clara moved further inside. Her boots made almost no sound against the polished floor. She kept her hands loosely clasped, resisting the instinct to touch anything, not out of fear but out of understanding. There were rules in places like this. Not written, not spoken, but observed nonetheless. She paused near a second display. This gown was ivory, its bodice worked with delicate stitching that shimmered faintly when she shifted her position. It was beautiful in a different way, softer, perhaps more romantic. Clara tilted her head slightly, studying the way the fabric fell. She did not notice at first that the room had gone quieter. "May I assist you?" The question was courteous. The tone was not. Clara turned. The attendant who had spoken regarded her with a composed expression, her hands folded neatly before her. There was no hostility there. No open disdain. Only expectation. Expectation that this would end quickly. "I am only looking," Clara repeated. A faint smile appeared. It did not warm the girl's eyes. "Our pieces begin at—" "I know," Clara said gently. The smile faltered just slightly. "I only wish to see them." There was a pause. Behind the counter, the second attendant had stopped sorting fabrics. From somewhere deeper in the shop, Clara heard the soft rustle of movement. Another customer, perhaps. The first attendant inclined her head again. "As you wish." Clara turned back to the gown. She had almost reached the door when the words came. They were not planned. She would later wish they had been. Planned words could be measured, shaped, contained. These were none of those things. "I did not come to buy," she said quietly. The silence that followed felt immediate. Complete. "I only wished to know what it might feel like, to wear something beautiful." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The truth of the words carried them further than sound ever could. A soft laugh, quickly suppressed, came from behind her. Clara felt it land light but precise. She straightened. Not abruptly. Not defensively. Just enough. Just precisely the amount required. She would leave now. That was the sensible thing. That was what she had always done. The door opened. The bell chimed again. And something shifted. Footsteps crossed the floor, unhurried, measured, certain. Clara did not turn immediately. She had learned, over the years, that attention given too quickly could be mistaken for something else. But she was aware of the change in the air. Of the attendant's posture adjusting, almost imperceptibly. Of the way the quiet in the room had altered, not uncomfortable now but expectant. "Miss?" The voice was new. Not loud. Not sharp. Simply certain. Clara turned. He stood a few steps behind her, tall without seeming to make an effort of it. His coat was dark, precisely cut. His posture, relaxed but controlled, suggested a familiarity with spaces that required no explanation. Lord Adrian Blackwood did not need to introduce himself. Clara recognized the type immediately. Not merely wealth. Authority. The kind that settled into a man so completely it no longer needed display. "The lady," he said, addressing no one and everyone at once, "will be attended to." The words were simple. The effect was not. The attendant who had spoken earlier straightened. "Of course, sir." Her tone had changed. Completely. Clara felt the shift, and did not like it. "I am afraid there is a misunderstanding," she said, turning fully toward him. Her voice was calm, controlled. "I was just leaving." He regarded her. Not quickly. Not dismissively. His gaze moved over her, not in the manner she had grown accustomed to, not measuring her worth in fabric and polish, but attentively, as though he were noticing something specific. "I think," he said, "you should stay." It was not a command. But it was not quite a suggestion either. "I cannot afford anything here," Clara replied. There it was. Plain. Undressed. True. For a moment, something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. Then, "My sister," he said, turning slightly, was hoping for a second opinion. Clara followed his gaze. A young woman stood near the entrance, watching the exchange with unmistakable interest. She stepped forward at once, her expression bright, her movement easy. "Desperately hoping," she added with a quick smile. "I am entirely incapable of deciding anything on my own." Clara hesitated. She understood what was happening. She was not foolish. But the young woman's expression held no mockery, no calculation. Only warmth, open, uncomplicated. "I would not wish to intrude," Clara said. "You would be rescuing me," the young woman replied lightly, taking a step closer. "Which is far more appealing." There was a pause. Clara considered refusing. She should refuse. That would be the correct choice. The safe one. The one that required nothing further. And yet, there was something in the ease of the invitation, in the absence of pressure, that unsettled her certainty. "Very well," she said finally. The young woman's smile widened. "Wonderful. I am Eliza." "Clara." "Clara," Eliza repeated as though testing the name. "Come then. You must tell me, this or the ivory?" She gestured toward the displays with exaggerated seriousness. Clara allowed herself to be led. She told herself it was temporary. That she would sit, offer a polite opinion and leave. That nothing about this would linger. Tea appeared. She had not seen who brought it. Fabric followed, silks in shades that ranged from soft gold to deep rose, laid carefully across the counter. Eliza examined each with earnest concentration, asking questions with an ease that suggested she expected answers. Clara found herself giving them. At first cautiously, then less so. "The ivory is beautiful," she said, touching the edge of the fabric lightly, "but it assumes softness. The silver does not." Eliza tilted her head. "In what way?" "It does not ask to be admired," Clara said. "It expects it." A brief silence followed. From the edge of her awareness, Clara heard something, a quiet sound that might have been a breath of laughter. She did not look toward it. She knew where it came from. Eliza smiled slowly. "I think," she said, "you are exactly the person I needed." Clara did not answer. She was aware, acutely now, of Lord Blackwood's presence. Not intrusive, not hovering, but there, watching. Not in the way men often watched women, quick, appraising, dismissive or admiring depending on what they saw, but steadily, as though what she said mattered more than how she appeared. It was unsettling. The decision, when it came, was made quickly. "The silver," Eliza declared. Without question. Clara inclined her head. "It will suit her. You see," Eliza said, turning briefly toward her brother. "Indispensable." He said nothing, but his gaze shifted briefly to Clara again. The bill was produced. Clara stepped back instinctively. This was where she would leave. She had stayed too long already. "Wait," Eliza said lightly. "There is more than enough fabric here. Truly. It would be absurd not to use it." The attendant nodded quickly. "Yes, miss. There is a remainder." Clara looked at them both. She understood. Of course she did. The offer was carefully shaped, disguised, made to appear incidental. It was kind. Deliberately so. She hesitated. Pride rose, familiar, immediate. But something else met it. Not need. Not exactly. Something quieter. The recognition of intention. Of effort. Of a kindness that had been arranged so that she could accept it without losing anything that mattered. "That is very generous," she said slowly. It is practical, Eliza corrected. A faint pause. Clara nodded once. In that case, she said, thank you. The fabric was wrapped and placed in her hands. It felt lighter than she expected. And heavier. Outside the air had shifted. The cold was still there, but softened now by a weak, emerging sunlight that touched the street in pale gold. Clara stepped onto the pavement and drew a breath. For a moment no one spoke. Eliza was adjusting her gloves, already speaking of tea somewhere nearby. Lord Adrian Blackwood stood slightly apart. Clara became aware of his attention before she met it. When she did, it was steady. Direct. Not demanding. Simply there. You carried it well, he said. Clara held his gaze for a fraction longer than she intended. Then she inclined her head. I have had practice, she replied. Something in his expression shifted again. Not amusement. Not quite. Understanding, perhaps. She turned away before she could examine it further. And as she followed Eliza down the street, the wrapped silver silk held carefully in her hands, Clara Hayes understood, clearly, unmistakably, that something had changed. Not the world. The world remained exactly as it was. But the distance between what she had been, and what she might become, felt for the first time, slightly less certain. The first invitation arrived 3 days later. It came not with ceremony, nor with the stiffness Clara had half expected, but with a quiet efficiency that made it feel almost ordinary, though nothing about it was. A card. Cream paper. Fine restrained lettering. Miss Clara Hayes is invited to take tea at Blackwood House, Thursday at 2 o'clock. There was a short note beneath it, written in a lighter hand. You promised me opinions. I intend to collect them. Eliza. Clara read it twice. Then a third time, though she could not have said why. Her mother looked up from her chair by the window. Well, she asked. Clara folded the card carefully. It is an invitation, she said. That much I gathered. There was a pause. Clara hesitated, not because she did not know what to say but because she knew too well. It is from the Blackwoods. Her mother stilled. Not dramatically. Not with surprise. But in that small, almost imperceptible way that comes when a thought settles into place more quickly than one is prepared for. I see, she said quietly. Clara moved toward the small table and set the card down. I am not obliged to go. No, her mother agreed. Another pause. But you are considering it. Clara allowed herself a faint, restrained smile. Yes. Her mother studied her for a moment, then returned her gaze to the window. Then you should go. Clara blinked. I had expected, she said slowly, a lecture on prudence. You have had 6 years of prudence, her mother replied. I think you may survive an afternoon without it. Clara said nothing. But something in her chest, tight, controlled, familiar, shifted just slightly. Blackwood House did not announce itself loudly. It did not need to. Set back from the street behind wrought iron gates, its facade was clean, symmetrical, deliberate in a way that suggested permanence rather than display. The stone was pale, the windows tall, the details precise without excess. Clara noticed all of it. She always noticed. She arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Not early. Never early. Promptness, she had learned, was a form of respect that required no explanation. The door opened before she could knock twice. A servant admitted her with quiet efficiency, taking her coat without comment, as though guests like her arrived every day. They did not. Clara followed him through a wide hallway where the air held that same subtle scent she had noticed in the shop. Polished wood, warmth, something faintly floral. Nothing was out of place. Nothing needed to be. Miss Hayes. Eliza appeared before Clara had fully taken in the room, her expression lighting at once. You came. I said I would. Yes, but people say many things, Eliza replied cheerfully. Far fewer actually do them. She reached for Clara's hands briefly, as though greeting an old acquaintance rather than someone she had met once under unusual circumstances. Come. I have been waiting to argue with you properly. Clara allowed herself to be led. The library was unexpected. Not because of its size, though it was large, but because of its atmosphere. It was not arranged for show. It was used. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled not with decorative volumes but with books that had been handled, opened, returned. 2 chairs stood near a low table, angled toward the fire, not symmetrically but practically, as though they had been moved and moved again until they settled into the positions that worked best. Clara stopped in the doorway. She did not mean to. But something in her, something quieter than thought, responded before she could prevent it. I know, Eliza said softly, watching her. It does that. Clara stepped inside. It is, she began then stopped. Exactly what it ought to be, Eliza suggested. Yes. Clara moved closer to the shelves, her fingers brushing lightly along the spines, not pulling any out, not yet, but acknowledging their presence. He reads constantly, Eliza added. It is his worst habit. It does not seem a harmful one. It makes him intolerable in conversation, Eliza said. He expects people to think before they speak. Clara's lips curved slightly. A difficult standard. Precisely. Tea was brought. It appeared as if it had always been there, cups, a small pot, a plate of delicate biscuits arranged with quiet precision. Eliza poured without ceremony. So, she said, settling into one of the chairs, tell me why you prefer the silver. Clara sat opposite her. It does not flatter, she said simply. Eliza raised an eyebrow. That is usually considered a disadvantage. Only if one expects to be improved, Clara replied. Some things do not need improvement. Eliza smiled slowly. Yes, she said. I thought you might say something like that. They spoke easily. More easily than Clara had expected. There was no careful navigation, no need to weigh every word for its potential consequence. Eliza asked questions as though answers were simply part of the natural order of things, and Clara, despite herself, found she wanted to answer them. About books. About the city. About small things that somehow led to larger ones without either of them quite noticing the shift. You have read widely, Eliza observed at one point. I have read what I could find, Clara said. That is not the same thing. No, Clara agreed. But it is what was available. Eliza considered her. I think, she said, you would like the North Wing. The North Wing? More books. Fewer people. Clara smiled faintly. I imagine I would. You may explore it later, Eliza said. I will give you the key, though I am not certain whether that is permitted. I suspect it is not. That has never stopped me. A quiet sound came from behind them. Not loud. But enough. Clara turned. Lord Adrian Blackwood stood near the doorway. She had not heard him enter. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something she had not felt in years. Uncertainty. Miss Hayes, he said. His voice was the same as before, measured, steady, as though each word had been chosen with care, even when spoken without hesitation. Lord Blackwood. Eliza did not turn. You are late, she said. I am precisely on time, he replied. You are late for the conversation. That, he said, moving further into the room, depends on whether it is worth joining. Clara looked at him then. Properly. There was something different here in this space. Not in him exactly, but in the way he occupied it. The controlled ease she had noticed before was still present, but it sat more naturally, less like something maintained and more like something inherent. He took the chair angled slightly toward them. Not directly opposite. Not quite beside. A position that allowed him to observe both without forcing either into focus. You were discussing the silver, Eliza said. So I gathered. And? He looked at Clara. It was not a long look, but it was deliberate. I would be interested, he said, in Miss Hayes's reasoning. Clara held his gaze. She did not look away this time. It does not assume admiration, she said. Pause. Something in his expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. No, he said quietly. It does not. Eliza leaned back, satisfied. You see, she said. Indispensable. He did not answer. But he did not disagree. Clara became aware, as the afternoon unfolded, of a pattern. Eliza spoke easily, often, with bright, quick intelligence that moved from one subject to another without hesitation. Adrian spoke less. But when he did, the conversation shifted, deepened, sharpened, clarified. He listened. Not passively. Actively. As though each word offered was something to be considered rather than merely heard. It was disconcerting. You believe, he said at one point, that honesty is preferable to comfort. Clara set her teacup down. I believe it is more reliable. That is not the same thing. No, she agreed. But comfort changes. Truth does not. He studied her. And if the truth is unwelcome? It usually is. Eliza laughed softly. I like her, she said. She says the things people avoid. That is not always a virtue, Adrian replied. No, Clara said. But it is often necessary. A pause settled. Not uncomfortable. But aware. Adrian leaned back slightly. You speak, he said, as though you have had practice distinguishing between the two. Clara met his gaze. I have. He did not ask how. She noticed that. And for reasons she could not entirely explain, she was grateful. Time passed differently in that room. Clara realized it only when the light shifted, subtly at first, then more noticeably as the pale afternoon gave way to something softer. She rose. I have stayed longer than I intended. You have stayed exactly as long as you should, Eliza said immediately. That is not how time works. It is how I prefer it to work. Clara smiled. I must go. Eliza stood as well. Then you must come again. It was said lightly, but not casually. Clara hesitated. There was again that quiet moment where choice presented itself not as obligation, but as possibility. I would like that, she said. Eliza's expression brightened. Good. Pause. Clara turned slightly. Lord Blackwood. He stood as she did. I hope, he said, that you will return. It was not phrased as a question, nor quite as a request. Simply, a statement offered with care. Clara considered it, then inclined her head. I expect that I shall. Outside the air felt different, cooler, sharper, more familiar. Clara stepped onto the pavement and drew her coat more closely around her. The world beyond the gates of Blackwood House had not changed. Carriages still passed. Voices still carried faintly through the streets. The city remained what it had always been, vast, indifferent, precise in its divisions. And yet, as she walked, Clara found her thoughts returning not to the house itself, nor to its scale or its quiet wealth, but to something smaller, more specific. A room. A conversation. A gaze that had not dismissed her. A voice that had not hurried her. She stopped briefly at the corner before turning toward home. This, she told herself firmly, changes nothing. She knew the truth of it. Worlds such as his and hers did not intersect. Not truly. Not in any way that endured. What had occurred that afternoon was unusual, temporary, a pleasant deviation from the expected, and she would treat it as such. She resumed walking. But the certainty she had relied upon for so long, steady, practical, unquestioned, no longer sat quite as firmly as it once had. And though Clara Hayes did not yet name it, the space between what was and what might be had begun, quietly, to widen. The invitation arrived on a quiet afternoon, folded within an envelope too fine to be mistaken for anything ordinary. Clara recognized the handwriting before she opened it. The gold will suit you. Do not argue. Think of it as theater if that makes it easier. Eliza. Beneath the note lay a formal card. A masked assembly at Hawthorne Hall. Saturday the 14th of May. Clara read it once. Then again. And then she set it down very carefully, as though the act of placing it upon the table might somehow steady the thoughts already beginning to move too quickly in her mind. I assume, her mother said from across the room, that this is not a casual invitation. No, Clara replied. There was a pause. It is not. Her mother studied her quietly. And will you go? Clara did not answer at once. Instead, she looked toward the small bundle of fabric resting on the chair nearby, the pale silver silk she had carried home weeks ago, still untouched, still waiting. I do not know, she said finally. That is not true. Clara exhaled. No, she admitted. It is not. The dress, when it was finished, did not feel like something she owned. It felt like something she had borrowed, from a life she did not entirely understand. The silk moved differently now, shaped with careful precision into something that fit her form as though it had been intended all along. The neckline was modest, the lines clean, the fall of the fabric effortless in a way that spoke of skill rather than extravagance. Clara stood before the narrow mirror in her room and regarded her reflection with a quiet stillness. She did not look transformed. That was the strange part. She looked like herself, only clearer, more defined, as though something that had always been present had simply been given permission to exist. You look, her mother said softly from the doorway, exactly as you should. Clara glanced at her. That is a dangerous thing to say. Only if you believe it is temporary. Clara said nothing. She reached for the mask, simple, pale, edged with the faintest detailing, and tied it carefully in place. For a moment she allowed herself to stand there. Then she turned away. Hawthorne Hall was alive with light. Not the restrained glow of carefully managed gatherings, but something warmer, more expansive. Candles blazing in every window, lanterns casting soft gold across the entrance, the sound of music drifting outward before one had even crossed the threshold. Clara stepped from the carriage and paused. Just for a moment. Then she moved forward. Inside, the world shifted. Masks transformed faces into suggestions rather than identities. Laughter carried more freely. Conversations blurred into a continuous murmur of sound and motion. It was easier, she realized, to exist here. Not because she belonged, but because no one quite did. Clara. Eliza appeared as if summoned by the thought, her mask a deeper shade, her expression unmistakable even beneath it. I knew you would come. You were very certain. I usually am. She stepped back, studying Clara with open satisfaction. Yes, she said simply. Exactly. Clara felt the faintest warmth rise in her chest. You arranged this, she said. I assisted, Eliza corrected. There is a difference. Clara did not argue. Come, Eliza said, linking her arm through Clara's. You must see the conservatory before it fills. It is the only place in the house that remembers how to breathe. Clara allowed herself to be led. They moved through rooms alive with music and movement, past dancers whose steps fell in practiced rhythm, past clusters of guests whose conversations overlapped and intertwined, past doorways that opened into smaller spaces filled with quieter exchanges. And then, the conservatory. It was warmer here, softer. Lanterns hung between tall glass panels, their light diffused through the leaves of carefully tended plants. The air carried the faint scent of citrus and damp earth, grounding the brightness of the rooms beyond. Clara stepped inside and paused. Yes, she said quietly. Eliza smiled. I thought you would like it. I do. There was a moment, brief but complete. Then Eliza released her arm. I will return, she said. Eventually. Clara glanced at her. That sounds like a promise you do not intend to keep. On the contrary, Eliza replied. I intend to keep it precisely as long as it suits me. And with that she was gone. Clara exhaled softly. She was alone. Or near enough to it. She moved further into the space, her steps slow, unhurried. Around her, a few couples lingered in quiet conversation, their presence distant enough to grant the illusion of solitude. For a moment she allowed herself to simply exist. No expectations. No calculations. No careful weighing of place and position. Just this. Footsteps sounded behind her. She knew before she turned. Some things did not require confirmation. Miss Hayes. She faced him. Even masked, he was unmistakable. Lord Blackwood. He paused a few steps away, studying her, not the gown, not the mask, but her. You came. Yes. A faint shift in his expression. I had hoped you would. Clara tilted her head slightly. You speak as though it were uncertain. It was. She considered that. I am not as predictable as your sister, she said. No, he replied. You are not. A quiet settled between them. Not uncomfortable, but aware. Lady Blackwood informs me, Clara said after a moment, that you do not dance. He almost smiled. My sister informs people of many things. And is she correct? He regarded her steadily. Would you like her to be? Clara met his gaze. No. Another pause. Then. Very well, he said. He stepped closer and offered his hand. It was a simple gesture. Nothing more. And yet, everything shifted with it. Clara placed her hand in his. The music reached them from the adjoining room, softened by distance but clear enough to guide their steps. He danced as he did everything else. With control. With precision. With a kind of quiet certainty that required no display. Clara followed easily. She had not forgotten. Some things once learned remained. The movement was familiar. The rhythm steady. And yet, something about it felt different. Not the dance itself, but the awareness of it. Of him. His hand at her waist, correct, measured, and yet undeniably present. The space between them, properly maintained, and yet charged with something neither of them acknowledged. They did not speak. They did not need to. The music filled the space words might have occupied. When it ended, they did not separate at once. For a moment they simply stood there. The world beyond the conservatory continued, unaware, uninterrupted. Clara. Her name. Not formal. Not distant. She looked up at him. Yes. He hesitated. Only briefly. I find, he said carefully, that I am no longer certain how to proceed. Clara held his gaze. That is unusual for you. Yes. Pause. And inconvenient. She allowed herself the faintest smile. I imagine it would be. His expression shifted. Not into amusement. into something quieter, more honest. I have spent the past weeks attempting to understand, he said, whether what began in that shop was merely circumstance. And I find that it was not. The words settled between them. Clara felt them. Fully. You understand, she said slowly, what you are saying? I do. And what it implies. Yes. She drew a breath. This cannot be simple. No, he agreed. It cannot. Your world. I am aware of my world. And mine. I am aware of that as well. Clara looked away just briefly, gathering the thoughts that refused to arrange themselves neatly. When this ends, she said quietly, it will not end equally. No, he said. It will not. She looked back at him. Then why begin it? The question was not sharp. Not defensive. Simply honest. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. Because I find that I cannot walk away from it, he said. From you. Silence followed. Not empty. Full. Clara felt something in her chest shift. Something she had kept carefully contained for longer than she could easily remember. That is not sufficient, she said. It is the truth. Truth is not always enough. No, he agreed. But it is where one begins. A long moment passed. Then, I need air, Clara said quietly. He nodded at once. The garden was dimly lit, lanterns spaced far enough apart to leave stretches of shadow between them. The sounds of the house faded as they moved further from it, replaced by the softer, steadier presence of the night. Clara slowed her steps. He did the same. For a while neither spoke. Then, you are right, he said. She glanced at him. About the difference between our worlds. That is not a difficult conclusion. No, he said. But it is one many choose not to see. And you? I have seen it clearly for some time. She studied him. And yet, he said, I find that clarity has not made it easier to leave this as it is. Clara stopped. So what are you proposing? He faced her fully now. Nothing, he said. Not yet. She frowned slightly. That is not reassuring. It is honest. She exhaled. You are asking me to step into something undefined. Yes. That is not a small request. No, he agreed. Silence again. The night pressed in gently around them, the lantern light catching in small fragments. Her dress, his coat, the space between them. I have spent years, Clara said quietly, ensuring that my life remained manageable. He listened. Carefully balanced. Predictable. Safe. And this is none of those things. No. A faint pause. And yet, she said almost to herself, I do not wish to walk away. He did not move. But something in him, something held, contained, shifted. Then do not, he said. Clara looked at him. Truly looked. Not at the title. Not at the position. At the man. You understand, she said, that I will not be less than I am. I would not ask it. That I will not accept something that requires me to disappear. I would not offer it. A long moment passed. Then, slowly, carefully, Clara nodded. Very well, she said. It was not a promise. Not entirely. But it was not refusal either. And for now, it was enough. Inside the music continued. Outside the night deepened. And somewhere between certainty and risk, between what had always been, and what might yet become, something new began. Quietly. Deliberately. And this time, neither of them looked away.